When were you first made aware of the privacy breach that was reported in the CBC just a couple weeks ago?
Okay. Well, as you know, I can't speak of any specific occurrence. Mais ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que bon.
But what I can say is that as soon as I got to the agency in July last year, I had a comprehensive briefing on all potential fraud cases and the cases that were under investigation at the time. And every time after that point onwards, every time there was a somewhat important investigation, I was informed of the situation.
You were informed of fraud when you arrived at the CRA, when you received your first briefing, is that correct?
I
had a general briefing on the different possibilities and on the past history.
But as it relates to the specific privacy breach that was reported with connection with H&R Block, when were you made aware of that case or those cases?
Vous savez.
Well, I'm sure that you know full well, Mr. Chambers, because of the Section 241 on the Income Tax Act. I cannot talk about specific cases.
Minister, I'm very familiar with Section 241. You're not talking about an in particular taxpayer at the moment. We're asking for when were you made aware? There is a briefing note, a memo, that has the sentence in it. Consensus is that gaps pose major risk to the agencies. Where there are internal funding, human resource considerations, all agree that visibility is needed. Do you recall receiving that memo?
Je reçois plusieurs mémos. Je suis briefée de différents.
I receive many memos, and I'm verbally briefed and in writing in different ways, so that doesn't surprise me.
To shed some light, this memo. Do you recall the memo that I'm referring to? This was reported in the CBC.
No, I do not.
No, you do not. Okay.
No, I do not. And I would just echo what the minister said. That
I have very limited time, Commissioner. I appreciate it. So, Minister, your testimony is that you cannot tell Canadians when you learned of a serious privacy breach that was reported in the news.
Je suis informée.
I am rapidly informed when the agency identifies a potential fraud case.
To be fair to say, if you're rapidly informed when the breach occurred, you likely would have been informed shortly thereafter, correct?
Absolument.
Okay.
Quand il y a une breach.
Absolutely. When there's a breach, a significant breach, I am quickly informed.
So why was that breach not reported to the public as a material breach when you learned of it shortly after it occurred?
Alors, la façon dont on fonctionne à l'agence.
Well, the way they work at the agency is that as soon as there's doubt, there's identity theft. First off, they block the account, and we communicate with the individual or the individuals or the company that is concerned. So we inform that person directly. So it's only in cases where there is something that's more generalized. For instance, during COVID, we would go ahead with an at-large communication, but it's usually the person and the person's concerns. They were immediately informed.
Thousands of taxpayers affected. If this breach occurred outside of government, there are obligations for those organizations to publicly inform or inform the public. Why is it that this breach was not publicized, but worse, withheld from the Privacy Commissioner until after the deadline passed for him to include it in his report in 2024?
Je peux vous dire que déjà dans le.
Well, I can tell you that in the general report of the auditor for 2022, we had already started revealing or transferring this information, providing this information, because yes, today you're talking to me about a block of 31,000 identity theft cases, but this has happened across multiple years, many years, and if you go back to the Auditor General's report from 2022, you would see that there are already 23,000 cases that have been made public.
If the process at CRA works really well in that the minister is informed relatively shortly after you're made aware of privacy breaches that happened over multiple years, it's reasonable to assume that you or your predecessor were made aware of these privacy breaches well before the March deadline that the Privacy Commissioner needs in order to include these privacy breaches in their annual report to Parliament. Why was it that these privacy breaches were reported to the Privacy Commissioner after the deadline, when your own testimony suggests that you would have been made aware of these privacy breaches well before the deadline to report these to the public?
Donc, moi, je suis informée rapidement.
Well, I'm quickly informed when there are attempts at identity theft, and then we need to validate. And to do that, we inform the individual or the individuals quickly, and then we report the situation. And as I said, we had already started reporting the situation in the AG report from 2022.
There have been very few breaches at the CRA because he was not made aware of them to include in his report in 2024. So the timeline just doesn't quite work for me at this moment, but I believe I've expired my time. Minister, you testified earlier that you have zero tolerance for fraud in all its forms at the CRA. How much fraud, what's been the loss to taxpayers from all forms of fraud at the CRA, say, last year?
Last year, it's about $2 million, and this year, as of now, $3 million.
Sorry, fraud in all its forms?
In identity, dans les vols d'identité.
In identity theft.
For all types of fraud, GST carousel schemes, you said zero tolerance for fraud in all its forms. I'm asking for a number on how much fraud has been perpetrated against the Canadian taxpayer.
Quand on dit qu'on a zéro tolérance,
when we say we have zero tolerance, it means we have a strong team and systems and tools.
Is that the testimony? You don't have a number?
à chaque fois qu'il y en a une, on
Well, every single time there is a case, we hit back and we introduce all the measures so that those situations don't keep happening. That's what I mean when I say we have zero tolerance. With
respect to the identity fraud, just one more question on this matter. Since it was a significant number of instances, a sophisticated operation, no doubt, did you report this to the RCMP? Have they been engaged to potentially consider links to organized crime, maybe an inside individual within the CRA that would be potentially aiding and abetting these kinds of schemes? Have you engaged the RCMP on the identity fraud cases?
Donc, le 31 000 cas dont on parle.
So the 31,000 cases that we keep referring to, there are multiple cases. There are groups of different situations in that. For instance, there is a denial of service attack, but there are also multiple individual attacks. So there are investigations that are going on, and we have an internal criminal investigations team that is also working on files. So there are different levels of investigations that are going on.
But your criminal investigations team is not the RCMP. So the question still remains, have any of these identity theft cases, especially those with respect to the third parties, breaches, have they been referred to the RCMP, or are you asking for help from the RCMP to help you?
Dans certains cas, certainement, parce
In some cases, definitely, because as I was saying, in the last 5 years.
That's a yes? You have asked the RCMP for help?
Certainement, parce qu'on a des condamnations.
Sure, because charges have been laid. 135 charges have been laid in the last 5 years. So that means it comes from the police.
Breaches and the issue with the H&R Block, you have engaged the support of the RCMP?
Si vous voulez me référer à un...
Well, if you want to point me towards a specific...
In the next hour. These frauds often result in a debt owing to the government, a debt owing to the taxpayer. So with respect to the GST, very sophisticated GST carousel schemes, my question would be, what's the highest amount that the government has written off with respect to the GST carousel schemes?
Encore une fois,
Once again, if you want to, if you would like to point me towards a specific case, I will be able to answer. But what I can say about carousels is that we have many measures in place. I can talk about those.
Generally, what's the single largest amount to a corporate taxpayer that the CRA wrote off last year?
Je ne peux pas vous parler d'un cas en particulier.
I can't talk about a specific case.
Because of Section 241? Is that correct? So would your position be that your predecessor and the CRA violated Section 241 when in 2019 they said that the highest amount of the amount that they wrote off in 2019 was $133 million. They actually were free to give the amount of the highest amount that a corporate taxpayer has written off. So, Minister, do you still want to rely on Section 241 privacy?
Regardez, je vais me tourner vers le commissaire.
I will turn to the committee.
Could it be 500 million, maybe 600 million? Like what's the amounts we're talking about here?
J'ai le processus sous les yeux, mais
Well, I have the procedure before me, but I cannot give you the amount. Would you like to respond to that?
Sorry, I want to be very clear about this. Section 241 does not allow you to hide behind giving anonymized details. A previous minister in a previous CRA department released a number that said in 2019, $133 million was written off to one taxpayer. So my question is, how much was written off to the highest amount in last year?
So first, again, to repeat, I won't be able to answer that question
Okay.
because I don't know.
Okay.
But we are very public with our write-offs in the public accounts.
Okay.
And that's where some numbers, as much as we can reveal, is revealed there. So we can
Thank
go
you.
back and look at those, and maybe I can find the number that you're
Thank you,
looking
Mr.
for.
Hamilton.